Liz Lambert, it's always good to catch up with you. And last time we put up something about this union, the number 8 Workers' Union of New Zealand. How is it progressing now?
It's going really well, thanks, Liz. We've got a team of advocates. We're having to do continuous improvement, which is a great thing because we're taking this from the standpoint of completely new arguments around the Health and Safety at Work Act. We've got mostly non-professionals because the legal profession is definitely not behind us on this and looking to help workers get their rights.
It's incredible how it's always that sort of 3 to 5% in a society that have the vision to make changes. This, just for people who aren't aware, this is a union for everybody, for every Kiwi, really, isn't it? And it's to protect the rights that we saw evaporate in the COVID rollout. Evaporate. Unions did not step forward and protect their workers across New Zealand. Give us, for people who aren't quite aware, a little summary of what your vision is.
Well, the number 8 Workers' Union was formed in response, really, to what the unions had done, which was to support the rollouts, to support the vaccinations, to support the lockdowns, which was really alarming right from the very beginning. And we now know, of course, that they are basically completely politicised. And the union is non-political. We have a very strong vision that it needs to stay non-political. We do not support political parties. We will not support political parties. And because we believe that with politics has come corruption into the legal process.
Which is very clear now. So it's really a lovely way to unite as Kiwis. Do you still have regular online Zoom meetings, Liz? Can people join in?
We have Wednesday and Friday night Zooms. We catch up with all of the cases. The principles of the cases. We don't talk about people's individual cases, but we talk about the industries that they're in. We talk about the other thing, the other main point of the union was to make the 2015 Health and Safety at Work Act a living document, something that workers can rely on every day in their workplace to make a safe and a happy workplace for them to be.
Let's look at that a bit deeper, Liz, because you've had some resistance, as you just mentioned, from lawyers, sadly, many of whom are jabbed. Somebody said to me, we no longer have fully impartial judges. We can't because all of them are jabbed. So they've all got that as an accepted, if you like, agenda, perspective,
yes,
which is heartbreaking in New Zealand. So we have a legal profession that's collapsed into the government narrative and may well be suffering very much ill health as a consequence. But what are you finding in terms of the pushback on using the Health and Safety at Work Act?
Well, for a start, even though they purport to know the Act, they don't know the Act. It's an incredibly valuable Act. People will be familiar with it from Section 83 that I talked about on the last interview. And we had a Section 83 letter, which was sort of kind of off the top of my head, look through the Act to see how we could use the Act as to resist the push for the vaccines. Now we're using the Act to prosecute, if you like, the employers. And of course, that will always bring in what the government had to do with it. Now, what we've discovered is that there are 2 sections of the Act that directly bring not into question, I say, that what 2 things, very, very important administrative things, which were against the law.
So Section 83 gave people a lot of hope that those who pushed the jabs could eventually end up being legally responsible for having coerced on behalf of the government. Why is there so much pushback by the lawyers and the judges on Section 83 of the Health and Safety at Work Act and on the Act itself, Liz?
It doesn't fit the political agenda. The agenda was to get as many people vaccinated as possible. And it must be difficult, I think, for the courts especially and the authority members to realise that they are being confronted with, they are being told what the Health and Safety Act means in this case.
Being told by whom, Liz?
Being told by the union.
Right.
We're basically having to act like them and explain to them what they should be looking at.
So the union again is not doing its job. It's not following the letter of the law.
I believe that the court, the judicial system has become really quite, if you like, I mean, the authority members aren't judges, but they are lawyers, and there's a kind of a loss of critical analysis of law as it applies to politics. They can't seem to see that the politics of this has sort of put blinders on them as to what they should, how they should be. They would normally analyse anything new that came to them, but they're kind of putting up barriers. And the biggest barrier that we're facing is what's called the 90-day rule. Now, they've been using this to slow down things considerably. So they've been saying, oh no, you didn't get your thing in on time. But they haven't even looked at something that's been really, really common. Well, it's been in the Employment Relations Act as long as I know.
What did you mean you didn't get your thing in on time? What does that mean?
You didn't get your PG in on time.
Your personal grievance.
You didn't bring it to the attention of the employer. What was the problem? I mean, this is just ridiculous when you think of it. Every person who resisted the jab raised a personal grievance, right? They raised it already. And they've got this, they seem to be stuck in this box of, we didn't know what you were complaining about. You didn't raise it in a way that we could know. You know, they're using the technical box to try and defeat the justice of our claim in each case.
And what are some of the other important sections of the Health and Safety at Work Act, Liz?
Okay, well, really important, because this is the key to bringing them to heel, is Section 191 of the Health and Safety at Work Act and Section 168.
Okay, let's go into each of those. What does Section 191 offer?
Okay, Section 191 is a section of the Act whereby the responsibility for the operational side of the regulator can be hived off and given to, like what we would say, the CEO or the very top of a government department.
Some examples of that?
The Commissioner of Police is one. The head of the Defence Force is one. The
Aviation Authority?
The Aviation Authority, and basically every CEO of every government department. And you'll notice, right, that seemed to have been what happened, because you can prove this by looking at the orders, and under Clause 9 of the orders, I'm talking about the vaccination order in this case, you could get an exemption of these people, right? You could send away. Now, Bloomfield was the one for education and the DHBs, right? For the DHBs, his role was as the Director General of Health. For the education sector, it's very unclear where he would have got that authority. But the important thing about Section 191 is an administrative matter that has to be taken care of. And that is that when WorkSafe passes this, say, the ability to give an exemption, that has to be notified in the New Zealand Gazette. Guess what didn't happen? No notifications in the Gazette. The easiest way to explain this is the order was given, but there were no soldiers to carry it out because nobody had authority.
What a mess. And why wasn't anything notified in the Gazette? Why would they do it like this? This isn't just incompetence.
Because under Section 191, and I'd really like people to look at it because it's not hard to understand when I explain it to you, they can only have this authority if they have special expertise in the area. So, for example, Bloomfield, right? What expertise has he got in the education system to be giving exemptions to teachers?
Some would argue, what expertise did he ever have in the health sector, given all the health damage he did?
Exactly.
So Section 191 impacts my life, potentially impacts my life or somebody else's life. You know, really, what's the individual impact of that section? Why are you saying it's so important for the individual to be aware of this?
Because this is the argument that we're using against them now. Okay.
What is it, the kernel of that argument, Liz? What are you saying? The
kernel of the argument is there was never any authority for them to be saying to a worker, because we're talking about the workers here, right? You must get vaccinated or you can't come to this workplace. Basically, because you're looking at an employment agreement is a private agreement between the employer and the employee. Also, they couldn't say to the employer, you're not allowed to employ people. And yet they were pretending that they could do something to the employer if they employed the person.
So what's the punishment by law for transgression of Section 191?
We don't know because it's all new. But I'll tell you what it does. It makes the other side settle. But we don't want everyone to settle. And we've got cases where it's gone too far for them to settle anyway. Okay? So we will get this thrashed out in court. But they are absolutely terrified. The second section of the Health and Safety at Work Act, which is so important, and this is for everybody, is that taking of information, personal information about your health status, right? Now, this applies to CVCs, right? But you'll remember that CVCs or COVID vaccination certificates were a voluntary thing, both for businesses and for the people who got them, right? Okay. Now, they kept you off the
premises,
out of everything.
It's like kind when you're not kind, voluntary when it's not actually voluntary.
Yeah.
But it's not really voluntary.
Yeah. Well, Section 168, for example, subsection 4, is basically what are the powers of WorkSafe to come into your business and inspect anything in there, you know, records, etc., etc., pieces of machinery. Now, under subsection 4, however, they are not in any case allowed to take any information, request any information, look at any information, store any information that would identify an individual worker by name.
Goodness me.
Yes. So under the order, you'll find under clause 7 and 8, there's a whole heap of instructions about when after you've gone to your doctor, you've got to come back, or you've got to tell the boss, or etc., and then it gets put into this register. That register is unlawful. And one of the things we're going to be pushing for in the future is that all of those records are destroyed.
That is incredibly Important. Say the section again and the subsection.
It's section 168, subsection 4 of the Health and Safety at Work Act.
Because one of the things that struck me from the beginning of Jacinda Ardern's rollout of this vaccine response, COVID response, was I have never been in a position in my life where someone could march up to my face and say, "Are you jabbed?" I mean, when men would ask me, I'd go, "Are you circumcised?" It was private medical information. I do not have to give my private medical physical information about my body. I certainly don't have to allow a government to push something in my body. And this now shows the illegality of a boss at work demanding that information.
Yes.
Liz, this is really important. So if we could get something like this into court, we'd have a direct conflict of the law prior to Labour getting in and Labour's illegal pushing of what? Would you argue they were not lawful edicts from this government?
Well, we're not going to be arguing about the government. We're going to be arguing about, because we're in the employment court or we're in the employment authority. As they say, that's not their jurisdiction. What we can say is that they are bound by the Health and Safety at Work Act. Every workplace is, and places that you would not think of as workplaces as well, because a PCBU is a person in charge of a business or undertaking. Now, an undertaking, for example, is a tennis club. And here we go on to, we've been talked before about Taupo Tennis. You've talked to Erica, who's our General Secretary.
She's terrific. Yeah.
Yeah, and she didn't, all of her causes of action were struck out in that first instance. We're appealing that to the High Court. So this argument about collection of information will go to the High Court.
On what basis were all her causes of action struck out?
The judge said, well, she wasn't a worker, but in actual fact, that doesn't make any difference, because under the Health and Safety at Work Act, visitors to an undertaking have the same rights under the Health and Safety at Work Act as do workers there. As you know, appealing always has to be on either or mixed on fact or law.
Yes.
There was facts and law, of course, that we will be appealing that one on. But by the way, guys, we're a union and we're there for the workers in the first instance. We just happened to get caught up in, well, I got caught up in Erica's case rather than the union itself. So we just have not got enough resources to take on everybody's cases.
Yeah. Yeah, but the more people who join, the more you'll have resources.
Well, this is the thing. And this is the other really important party in terms of that section 168(4) are businesses that were closed down or who struggled. There needs to be damages against WorkSafe, who came in and checked your business and said, who have you got? Why aren't you insisting your people are vaccinated? Why aren't they wearing masks? Medical interventions, we've looked at masks from the point of view of medical interventions, but also people often got mask exemptions because of personal medical information.
Well, if you have asthma and you wear a mask all day and you're breathing in carbon dioxide to your lungs, it is going to exacerbate asthma, and many Kiwis have asthma.
If the bosses had known about section 168(4), they would have been able to say, well, to WorkSafe, what are you talking about? I'm not allowed to give you any information. I'm not allowed to take the information off my worker.
Wow, that's profound. What are you hoping, that there'll be a case that tests this in court, Liz?
Well, there'll be Erica's case for a start. No, we're not giving up on Erica's case. And what the legal profession is doing is trying every which way, and the courts are allowing them to get away with trying to get costs against us.
There's a profound price, Liz, that the courts are paying in doing this obfuscation, this sophistry about words, trying to sort of slither out of it. I was going to say slime out of it, slither out of it. And that price is many Kiwis are now very disillusioned with our judicial system, looking at different ways that we could run a fair system of justice in this country. And it's growing by the day. People looking beyond the current judicial system. So they shoot themselves in the foot by doing this sort of sophistry, don't they?
They do. This is their chance. This is their watershed, right? This is their Watergate.
Let's go to the Amanda Turner case. Now, this one's an interesting one. It's about free speech. And I'll just look at some of the notes that I've taken. The core question here, you said to me, is, were people put in management roles within the public service to push out the vaccine at all costs? So tell us the facts of this case. Amanda Turner, a palliative care nurse. What is the facts? What are the facts of the case, and why is it so significant here?
Yeah, thank you. Well, so Amanda, fantastic nurse, fantastic woman, was sacked back in early part of 2021. The facts of the matter were that she came to the attention of the Wairarapa DHB, as it was then, because some talk in the workplace, and it was political in the most instance, we're going to be arguing that they started off targeting her because, one, she's a Christian, and two, she's a Trump supporter. She didn't talk about it much. They knew this of her, though. And she had a couple of friends on Facebook, and she sort of talked about those things. She'd criticised the vaccine on her Facebook page, her private Facebook page. She'd criticised the government. Anyway, so they obviously thought, right, and this was back in December of 2020. This was before the vaccines had come out.
Could I just remind people it's irrelevant what her personal views are, and the fact she's exercising her right to express things in a free way is the very underpinning supposedly of our country, which is based supposedly on free speech. And this whole rhetoric about Trump and far right, alt-right that's being run in the media is a total irrelevancy. I'm not that, but I'm often accused of that, or counterspin are often accused of that, or many of us are, simply because we diverge from the views of the government. It is so tiresome. So I think we put that aside, except to note that's one of the reasons they went after her, possibly. Is that it?
Yeah, well, I believe it. It wasn't possible. I believe it was because they said, basically, that's why they started to investigate her, right?
Oh.
The thing is that it's not just ordinary free speech. It's political free speech, because it was political that she was making free speech comments all of the time. And in the workplace, even if she'd made them in the workplace, right? Even if she'd trumpeted them around in the workplace, it's political speech which is protected under the ERA, under the Employment Relations Act, right? It's also protected under the Human Rights Act. So in your workplace is a very important place to have political free speech, as we can see now. Why? Right? Because otherwise you've got the boss who's running the government line, and they're in control of whether you stay or go.
And you've got workers intimidated, silenced.
Yes.
Their views kept to themselves as if their views do not matter. The interesting part of being in a community of New Zealanders or human beings is when we can exchange differing ideas with respect. This is ludicrous. So what happened to her? She still has her license, doesn't she?
Yes.
But she is fighting a strikeout. Is that right, by the disciplinary body?
Well, there's a process for getting it to the disciplinary tribunal. It goes through what's called a professional conduct committee. And they supposedly had made out of this complaint about her postings some sort of charge that she was bringing the DHB or the nursing profession into disrepute, right? That links back to her workplace, right? That was not a complaint by a health consumer, a patient, right? They can only actually deal with complaints from health consumers. That's their role. That's where they sit over there, okay?
So they are not enabled to look at people's views as right or wrong. This Orwellian world of right speak or wrong speak. They don't have the right to look at that.
Not under law.
That's significant. That is so significant. And then we also have the issue of the people on these disciplinary bodies. It is worth looking at whether any of them are personally compromised. Have they got investments, for example, in, well, an obvious one would be Pfizer, or do they have any interest financially in the rollout of the jabs? You can't say his name, but you did say there's been a doctor who they took his license, and that, you recently heard, has been struck out because of bias. You're looking into that, aren't you, Liz?
Yeah, I'm going to find out about this, because this was one of the things that I put the disciplinary tribunal on the spot, and they still haven't made an answer to our strikeout application that we put to them in February of this year, early February. I look at the board, as they call it, and said, this one has complained before. She was instrumental in getting a midwife, her license taken away. She's not unbiased. This one has got links to a private nursing business that got lots of money for setting up testing for the vaccine rollout.
We're hearing up to $150 per jab for setting up some jabs. So if some of these were part of setting up a jab station, they would be compromised in judging.
And even
someone.
that testing, they got paid a lot of money for that. They got paid for the setting up. They got paid for each test they did for people.
Wow.
We're lining up. Can you imagine? I was in Wellington one time. I didn't know why all these cars were there. People were lining up to get tested, thousands and thousands of cases. There's millions of dollars involved in this.
Oh, my goodness. How do people get on these disciplinary bodies? What do they have to come from? How are they checked? Do you know anything about that, Liz?
You have 5 on a board. You have your chairperson, who's always got to be a lawyer. And then you've got 2 people who are called lay people. And then you've got 3 people who are part of the actual discipline that they're looking at. So if 5 people, 3 people who are midwives, or been midwives or whatever, 3 people who are nurses, etc., or 3 people who you've got, say, the physiotherapists, right? So you'd have, in that case, you'd have 3 people who are physiotherapists. Whatever.
Do we know where the layman or laywoman could come from? Could it be, for example, a media person? Could it be someone really? Because we know the media have an absolute groupthink.
In this case, there were no media people as far as I could make out, but you can be pretty sure if you're at the top of some sort of profession, you get asked to be on all of these bodies and to have your input and all of this, and they get paid.
Liz, there has to be.
It's all a big girls and big boys club up there, and but we have the law to fight them with, so they are going to lose.
Gosh, any real inquiry into this, and we know that the Prime Minister or the former Prime Minister's inquiry into the rollout of the COVID response is ridiculous. It leaves out so many important issues. But any real inquiry in the future will need to look at these disciplinary bodies, who was on them, and whether they were compromised, which would mean their decisions were deeply compromised as well.
The decision that went to it would have gone to the district court possibly only. It would have only needed to go from the tribunal to the district court. That's where Dr. Shelton and Carmody had theirs overturned, but theirs wasn't on the basis of bias on the disciplinary tribunal. Theirs was something different again. Theirs was to do with, well, they need to earn a living, was basically what they won it there. And all of the same actors are involved, you know, even the lawyer who's acting against Mrs. Turner was the lawyer who took the case to the district court for the doctors. Same lawyer.
It's extraordinary. I know Sue Gray and Kirsten Murfitt were being taken to the disciplinary arm of the Law Society, or the...
Were they indeed?
Absolutely, after the Baby Will case. And it's ludicrous. They both sent emails to me that day saying, do not use the full name of Baby Will, use Baby W. But everybody knew his name and the parents wanted his name out there. But it turns out it was the very doctor for Starship who laid that complaint to the Law Society. So it's the same bad actors across the board who are doing this, causing this mayhem.
I've had a complaint about when I was running the midwifery case. The Midwifery Council sent a complaint to the Law Society about me. Well, if people watch my channel, they'll find out what I had to say to the Law Society about that. And I never heard anything more from them.
What did you say, Liz?
Basically, I said, I'm not a member of the Law Society. You've got nothing to do with me. And the Midwifery Council wants to watch out because basically they had guilty knowledge of what was going on, and that my client that I'm working for, right, the midwife, she should have been given a medal instead of discipline from these people, because she was she was doing what nurses and midwives should have been doing, which was warning her patients against it.
Warning the patients about risks, protecting the unborn baby. So in other words, you can say to the Law Society, I'm a lawyer, I remain a lawyer with or without the license from you, and I will continue to do the law.
Yes.
Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's liberation.
Well, they did reply and said, we've sent your reply back to the Midwifery Council.
Well done, Liz.
But I said to the Law Society, I said to them, look, because I didn't, at that stage, of course, this was back in November, I think, of 2021. I said, I'm glad to see the Law Society is not attempting to, have a go at its members. Because you'll lose them otherwise.
Absolutely. I love your spirit, Liz. So this Amanda Turner case on free speech, and we take it back to, were people put in management roles within the public service to push out the vaccine at all costs? That's what will be really at the centre of the case, is coming up in Wellington on the 17th, 18th and 19th of April. Is that right? At the Wellington Employment Court. Where is that based if you want public support there?
You'll have to look that up. Yeah. They're usually quite small courtrooms, but I think if people, because the first day is going to be really important, because we're going to talk about terrorism actually on the first day.
So how does terrorism come into a free speech case of a palliative care nurse?
The protagonist used to work for the NZDF,
the New Zealand Defence Force.
For a long career in that Defence Force. He was deployed overseas somewhere, we don't know where.
And what do you mean by the protagonist?
Well, he was the person who said, we need evidence of these posts that she's been making, because she wasn't talking about it at work. And he was saying and it's in his evidence, which is great, his brief of evidence, that he asked for this evidence, and suddenly this other woman who was a friend of hers is supposed to have come up with this evidence that she was talking about the vax, and that's as far as it should have gone. But then there was all these other posts that they brought in about her opposition to immigration of certain groups, right? which is a political matter as well.
Which is still free speech. I may not agree with your view, but I will die on a hill for you to be able to express your view. Otherwise, we don't have free speech in this country.
Right. Well, the thing is that it was made out to be, here we go again, racism, right? Because of opposition to certain people, that she was of the opinion, having read a book called The Third Jihad, to certain people coming into this country unchecked, right? So he made it out to be a terrible racist thing and pushed it, that it was going to bring the nursing profession into disrepute. And this is how it all sort of got was blowing all up out of, there was nothing in her employment situation that warranted any of this at all, because she's protected in her political speech.
Yeah, it's not relevant to it. Interestingly, Liz, I interviewed Winston Peters a while ago and recalled when he questioned the plans years ago, when it was really the early 2000s, for a big influx of Chinese to New Zealand, when he just questioned, saying, is this what Kiwis want? Do we want a big influx, or do we want it to be a steady incorporation of new Kiwis, slow and steady, and give time for them to integrate? And there was an outcry in the media, I remember 2 decades ago, what a racist, Peters is racist. And I remember thinking, well, that's a sensible view. We really want to bring people in. Some of my best friends are Kiwi Chinese.
Especially with another language.
Yeah, with another language. Let's give time. Let's give time for our infrastructure, our roads and hospitals and schools to cope. Let's give time for people to integrate. John Key went ahead and brought in, nearly 1 million New Zealanders in 9 years. And the country simply can't cope. And if you doubt it, go on the Southern Motorway in the morning. So these are all valid questions that a civilized country can have. Instead, we have this hysteria. So how will you cope with that?
The thing is that I did research on him, this man, and I found out that firstly, he had this long career in the NZDF, and he only came back into nursing proper in 2018. He was a lieutenant colonel, and he still holds that rank as far as we know, because he's still in the territorials. He also did 2 years of a master's degree in security. Right. While I was looking in the marvellous New Zealand Gazette, I happened to look for designation, because I was looking for information about Section 191 to make sure that Mr. Bloomfield and the rest hadn't been designated as anything. I found designation of terrorism, and I find that there were many terrorist groups in this country who've been designated terrorists, and 99% of them are jihadist groups.
I've got that here, designation of 3 terrorist entities as of 14 December 2021, pursuant to Section 22 of the Terrorism Suppression Act 2002. The organizations are the PKK, known as the Kurdistan Workers' Party, and the Mujahideen Youth Movement, and the third one is ETA, known as the Basque Fatherland and Liberty. So, yeah, we've never had that discussed openly with New Zealanders, have we?
But they're there on a police website that with a bit of searching you can find, because it has to be, and they can say, but it's, it's there. But because we've got this overlay and this brainwashing that we've got terrorists under the bed of women who, carry yoga mats or are interested in children's clothing or plait their daughters' hair.
Or knit.
Talk about gaslighting, absolute gaslighting. And this is what I've said in our briefs of evidence in reply.
So your point is we have actual terrorist groups, people like Kate Hanna and what's his name, Sanjana Hattatau or whatever his name is, who's very much being looked at now by a lot of Kiwis. He's tried to be very under the radar. But those people who work for Te Pūnaha Matatini, they're trying to inflate, terrorist, and disinformation, misinformation, sort of / right-wing, alt-right, far-right terrorists. They try to inflate all of this. Even Helen Clark weighed in the other day and said, anyone who disagrees is disinformation. We must stop the disinformation. That's all gaslighting when we've got actual terrorists here in the country that never get mentioned by them.
I'm going to be asking this man, well, why are you saying that this was, and you've linked it into, firstly, you were trying to stop valid free speech, right? And political speech, because this is linked to politics. And then you bring in all of this racist stuff, which obviously it isn't. Turns out, actually, and they didn't know this, that Amanda her children are half Maori. She has also got Maori blood.
New Zealand is such a good country for...
Well, isn't it a fantastic country? Isn't it fantastic? We're all 2 degrees of separation.
And the Americans who are probably behind this and the CIA are probably scratching their heads going, how do we do the gaslighting in New Zealand the way we can do it so easily in America? That is just a perfect response that she's got half Māori children. But let's look at, if we're talking about other nationalities coming in, there's something else you brought my attention to, Liz, and full credit to you for digging this out. I'm talking here about the COVID-19 public health response, brackets, air border, close brackets, order of 2021. Now, section 13, I'll read it out. Must be vaccinated, brackets, or be excused or exempt. Subsection 1, a person must be vaccinated before they arrive in New Zealand. This is as at 2021, unless they're excused or exempt. A person is excused if they, A, are age 16 years or under, are a New Zealand citizen. This was before it was all being forced at us. But if we go down to subsection G of 3, it says a person is exempt if they, G, are a citizen of Afghanistan and arrive in New Zealand on or before 12 December 2022, and H, a person is exempt if they are an arrival from Ukraine. That was in the 2021 order. What do you think is the reason for exempting those 2 countries, people from those 2 countries, Afghanistan and Ukraine?
I don't know if I've ever talked to you about the leaked email.
What are you referring to there?
Right. Well, it's about June of 2020, whilst we were suffering lockdowns, and there was a break there after we had a break. And then there was demonstrations in AOT Square, etc. I went to, and other places in the country. And it's saying, firstly, they've got to think about the election in whenever it was going to be, October, I think, or September. And in the lead up, they were going to firstly make Matariki a public holiday, right? They were going to hyperbolise the case numbers. They were going to tell that the police were agreeable that they would support the Black Lives Matter protests and shut down on the others, shut down on the people who were saying we don't want to be locked down anymore. This was wrong. And that they had the police, they had the army on board to bring in martial law. Right?
This is a leaked email from whom to whom? Who was it being sent to? It
was an internal email within the, from Jacinda to Hipkins and Robertson.
Have you got a copy of this, Liz?
Yeah.
I would really like to see this.
Yeah.
And then there was Operation Kia. Can you tell us about that?
Well, Operation Kia, according to the OIA, was a historical operation where they were supporting people in Afghanistan who had supported them against the Taliban, right?
People like translators for the New Zealand troops.
Yeah. So basically, because we were in Afghanistan while the Taliban were there in support, sort of support roles, right? But of course, what happened when the Taliban took over this time was they got sent $3 million of taxpayer money. Remember that. Huh?
So will you keep us up to date with Amanda Turner's case? Because this feels like a very important one.
Absolutely. I think it's important for free speech. It's important for what is the reason for such a shutdown on free speech, and it could be something very, very important to do with our state security. But it's an ongoing story, and I will learn a lot as well as know a lot when I go into the court.
That's happening on the 17th of April, and that is at the Wellington Employment Court. Liz, always good to have a catch up with you. Thank you.
You're most welcome, Liz.